Here to respond is Erich Pratt. He is Senior Vice President of Gun Owners for America, and Mark Glaze, former Executive Director of Everytown for Gun Safety. Erich, I'm interested in how gun rights organizations see this. Do you and your members believe the president is caving, or is supporting background checks a sensible way to respond to these massacres while protecting gun rights? Erich.
Raymond, what the president is pushing is not only going to violate the Second Amendment rights of Americans, it's also going to backfire on Republicans. This is akin to George Bush's read my lips, no new taxes, broken promise of the 1990s. And this is going to completely backfire. Look, Rush Limbaugh's been talking about this, by the way, for the past 2 days. Here you have a president who 2 years ago promised the assault on the Second Amendment is over, and yet now he's doing an about-face. If Republicans stab gun owners in the back, they're going to suffer at the polls in the same way that George Bush did, in the same way that Bill Clinton did when he said he lost the majority of the Congress because of the gun issue, and more recently, the same way Senate Republican Kelly Ayotte lost her Senate seat by 1,000 votes because key gun rights organizations in the state said, we will not support her, do not vote for her because of her gun votes, and she lost by 1,000 votes.
But Erich, it's background checks. It's background checks. I mean, it's not limiting capacity. It's not taking guns off the market. It's simply background checks. I want to get to Mark, and then I'll let you respond. Mark, how effective would these background checks be, even if you did pass them nationally? I mean, both Ohio and Texas have them, and these guys got their guns.
Well, those states don't have universal background check laws. The way the system works now, the only time I have to take a background check is if I buy my gun from a licensed dealer.
Right.
But if I'm a felon, if I'm a domestic abuser, I know how to avoid that. I don't buy from a licensed dealer. I go online or I buy from a so-called private seller. That's how people slip through the cracks. And these checks are extremely effective. They don't stop anything any law-abiding citizen wants to do with a gun. All they require is that if you happen to be a felon, if you happen to be under a domestic violence restraining order, if a judge has said you are too mentally ill to own a handgun, then that background check stops you. And that is the reason I presume that 90% of Republicans in a Politico poll that just came out say it's a good idea.
Go ahead, Erich.
Raymond, it does stop good people from getting guns. There are mistakes in the system, and people end up dying. A right delayed is a right denied, and people have died waiting to get their firearms. But let me tell you, police by a 2-to-1 margin favor concealed carry over expanding background checks because that's the way you stop these mass shootings. You need people there who are the potential victims to shoot back, and FBI has documented many, many cases where that's how mass shootings have been stopped.
Erich, I hear, let me stop just 1 second, Mark. Erich, I hear in your voice, there's almost a, do you believe the president's going to pay a political cost for backing even this limited background check, a national or universal background check?
Look, Raymond, I'm not God. I'm not going to predict the future, but those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it. President Clinton lost control of the Congress. He said because of the gun issue, which involved background checks, the Brady Bill background check.
Will your organization oppose the president in 2020 if he backs background checks?
We will not support him if he goes forward with this.
Wow. Mark, I want to move on to you. There was talk of red flag laws, which would confiscate guns from individuals. 17 states already have these, that a judge deems a threat to himself or others. Now, here's the president from earlier this week. Watch.
We must make sure that those judged to pose a grave risk to public safety do not have access to firearms, and that if they do, those firearms can be taken through rapid due process. That is why I have called for red flag laws, also known as extreme risk protection orders.
Mark, the studies on these red flag laws are all over the place. They seem to have an inconclusive or zero impact on the outcome, on firearm homicides.
Well, they're relatively new. These laws have just started to be passed by state legislatures, and so we're still waiting to see what the effect is. But we know what the immediate effect is, which is that in the 17 states that have these laws, they've been used hundreds of times to stop people who are exhibiting signs of mental illness from buying guns or other sorts of problems. And by the way, the El Paso shooter might well have been one of them if Texas had one of these laws. His own mother was so concerned about what he was going to do with his semi-automatic rifle, she reported him to the police.
Before we go, gents, I've got to get to this. One of the Dayton shooters' notebooks were released, okay, to the Daily Mail this week. Now, we have decided not to broadcast the images of his writings, but they are filled with a desire to hunt people down, satanic references, even referring to himself as the servant of the serpent evil incarnate, end quote. Friends describe him as a methamphetamine smoker who's played violent video games. Now, these are common marks of these mass shooters. They share isolation, mental illness, violent video games as a hallmark. Are we focused on the wrong thing by worrying about background checks and limiting guns when perhaps it is the perpetrator and not the instrument that we should be focused on and identifying these people early? I'll give you each of you a chance at this.
Absolutely, because banning the tool or controlling the tool is not going to stop the evil in the heart. California, Illinois, Florida all have red flag laws, and yet they've had mass shootings in the past year. These laws are not working to make people safer. In fact, what they do is allow police to take guns from people without due process, and in some cases that's resulted in death, like Gary Willis, an African-American gentleman in Maryland, where an angry relative wanted to get revenge against him after an argument. He was completely innocent, but police came to the home. When he answered the door with a gun in his hand because it was 5:17 a.m. in the morning, he ended up being shot to death. These are very dangerous laws, and no Republican or Senate Democrat, for that matter, should vote for these.
Before I run out of time. Go ahead, Mark, very quickly.
Here's the common sense answer to your argument based on a simple observation of reality. People in every country in the world play violent video games. People in every country in the world watch violent movies. People in every country in the world have the same incidence of mental illness as we do here in the U.S. It is only in the United States that we have this kind of mass shooting this frequently. 100 people dead.
That is not true.
Mark, tell that to the guy who went to 4 places in Orange County and stabbed people. I mean, you can use a car, you can use a knife. You see the spate of knife violence in London.
Raymond,
I mean, the instrument.
It
seems to me the instrument is secondary.
The United States is not even in the top 50 when it comes to per capita mass shootings.
I got to leave it there, gents. I thank you both so much for this bracing discussion.